Welcome to a new episode of Free to Thrive in Work and Life. Hi, I'm your host, Pascale Landriault, International Career and Quality of Life Coach, helping clients from around the world to create fulfilling careers and lives by igniting their talents and their passions, building courage and confidence, and breaking free from the barriers that are keeping them from thriving. And today I'm very happy to have as my guest, Lana Cuthbertson. Now, Lana has worked in communications, leadership, and tech adoption acceleration for large organizations as well as small organizations, and also in politics. She's the co-founder of Parity YEG and the former chair of Alberta North chapter of Equal Voice, where she advocates for the election of more women in politics and in political offices across Canada. She was named Top 40 Under 40 in 2018 by Avenue Edmonton. So welcome, Lana. Very happy to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I'd like to start by asking you, how did your interest grow in politics, or how did you actually start being interested in politics?
I've been asked this question quite a lot, and I've been tracing it farther and farther back in my life. And I've eventually realized that it started when I was in elementary school. My mom was part of a group called the Kindergarten Committee. And the Kindergarten Committee was a group that consisted of her and 4 other women. All of them were women with kids in the same elementary school that I went to in Edmonton in Canada. And at the time, the provincial government was looking at cutting funding for kindergarten. And the 5 of them said, no, early childhood education is important. So they formed this committee, this lobbyist group, this advocacy committee. And they met lots of times, and they went to the legislature and had meetings with politicians and advocated for retaining funding for kindergarten. And I kind of realize now that was my first sort of entry into the political world, and the entry into women getting together and using their voices for something that they believed in. And so my mom was very inspiring to me in that way. Yeah.
So you, as a child, witnessing that kind of, developed your interest for it.
Exactly. And, they would, the 5 of them would rotate having everyone over to their houses, and there were a bunch of kids involved, so we would all go play, and the moms would meet, and just watching what they were doing, even from the sidelines, was very influential for me. I realize now. And then my mom has just always been a pretty political person, so she encouraged us to get involved in campaigns. She had political friends who recruited us to volunteer on campaigns as well, and so I did that throughout school, into high school and into university, and I've kept doing that since then.
Wow! And what actually triggered you to found this Parity YEG? How did that happen? Good
question. That's also a bit of a long story. So when I was in university, I was doing my undergraduate degree at the University of Alberta. I did a degree in English literature. It's just my passion. I love writing and reading. And I had a summer job at a place called Volunteer Alberta. And the executive director at the time had gone to Ottawa on a business trip. And she came back with a stack of business cards. And it was my job to take all the names and numbers in the business card and write them in our database at work. And so I was doing that, kind of transcribing, sort of a 19-year-old kind of job. And one of the business cards was for the chair at the time of an organization called Equal Voice. And I just kind of stared at it, and I thought, it said elect more women on the business card. And I thought, that's important. It just sort of was a banal moment, but turns out to be very pivotal. So I looked up the organization and thought, I wonder if I could start a student chapter at my university. And so I tried, and I failed. But that was a very important learning experience. And then I went to do.
How did you actually try, and how did you actually fail? How did that?
So universities, you can start clubs at most campuses, and so I gathered a few friends together, and I said, okay, you be the treasurer and you be the secretary and I'll be the president. And we registered as a club and tried to hold events. I remember this one specific time, we were just trying to get our act together, and we booked a room on campus and paid $300. We had sort of, fundraised money from a law firm somewhere in town, and they said, yeah, we'll give you, $500. And we're like, wow, that's crazy. So we paid $300 to book this room, but just, I couldn't rally the group to get together and plan this event. And so we ended up kind of not really doing it. And instead we used our room booking for just a meeting. And I just remember that so well. It's funny, today I was talking about the difference between losing and failing. And we talk a lot about failing and kind of how important it is to embrace failure and learn from failure. But I often think like what I did that day wasn't really, it was failing, but I wish I had lost. I wish I had sort of just done as much as we could do and held the event. And even if no one showed up, like maybe we lost that. We didn't have a win, but the failure to even follow through and instead just holding a meeting was, I guess I remember that pretty well also. And that was a good lesson,
like
but I've been
not
thinking
doing
about that a lot lately because
it was like the fact
yes,
of
exactly.
not doing it. Yeah. And that,
exactly.
I always like to think of, experiences and even like learning experiences versus even using the word failure. But I guess you didn't even get there because you actually didn't go all the way through. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. I've been reading a lot of Brene Brown lately. And she talks a lot about getting into the arena and sort of the Theodore Roosevelt quote. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, like you got to get into the arena. And I just feel like that day we didn't even manage to get into the arena to lose. Like we stayed on the sidelines and just had this meeting. And I think, man, would it have been an even more important learning experience had I followed through and lost instead of sort of failed. So
and even you could have followed through and won too. Who knows? Maybe a bunch of people would have showed up and yeah,
exactly. I know. So anyway, I had that experience. It was very pivotal, and then went away, did my master's in Ottawa, came back and joined the Alberta North chapter of Equal Voice. And that was full of more people who had a little more experience organizing. And so I held a few different positions before I became the chair of that chapter. And we had some success with a particular strategic plan, which was motivating. And I kind of finished my term as chair there. And I thought, okay, I want to do something maybe even bigger, something that we weren't able to do maybe before because we had been a bit constrained by the bounds of what a chapter of Equal Voice can do. And so I thought, okay, in order to keep going and keep growing, I'll found a new nonprofit, and that's how Parity YEG came to be.
Okay. And what does YEG actually stand for? Like, what is?
Yeah, so it's the symbol for Edmonton. So on Twitter, often cities are known by their airport code. You can use a hashtag YEG airport code. And so YEG is Edmonton's airport code. And so that's why we've called it that. And there are lots. Edmonton is kind of one of the cities that really has embraced YEG as like a name for the city. Not every city has done that as much as Edmonton. So local people kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, I get it.
And what's your mission at Parity YEG? What do you hope to bring?
So we're aiming to have 50% of the candidates in all levels of government elections in Edmonton be women. So we'd like to see all the elections that happen in Edmonton have a gender balanced slate of candidates. And right now we see 20 or 25% of the candidates in elections in Edmonton are typically women. And so that's how many female politicians we end up with. And so we're trying to encourage more women to run so we can have more gender balanced governments.
And how do you do that?
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's a big question. So there are lots of different barriers that we hear about from women who are thinking about, maybe I'd like to go into politics. And so trying to encourage them is sort of about trying to address those barriers. And it's it's a tough problem to tackle because so many of these barriers are so systemic and so ingrained in our society. It's sort of like fighting against the patriarchy. And so, some of the practical things we do are we hold education sessions like campaign schools. It's almost not so much about the school itself, because women come to the campaign schools and a lot of them, have volunteered on campaigns, or they've had leadership roles in their communities where they say, okay, yeah, I guess I know how to do this. It's almost more of a confidence building exercise and a community building exercise. So we like to say that by doing things like that, we're opening doors for women into politics and sort of showing them, okay, here's a side door that's open to you now through this campaign school that you might not have had before, because the front doors are typically clogged with men, and women don't really see a way through those. We've also been working on sort of using technology to tackle the problem of social media and how it can be quite a toxic place for women in politics and in public life in general. And so we've built something called Parity Bot that uses machine learning to detect abusive or problematic tweets sent towards women in politics. And then for every problematic tweet it detects, it sends out a positive, encouraging tweet. And so, it's almost a little bit gimmicky in a way, but we hope that it raises awareness for people just about how often this happens to women. Often women in politics, are seeing this every day and no one else really sees it. And also we're hoping that the Parity Bot itself can sort of counteract some of the negativity with some positivity, and women in politics can follow it and sort of see that there's, there are people behind them and people trying to encourage them. And so, yeah, education. And then, we've talked a little bit about fundraising as well. People may have heard of something in the United States called Emily's List. And a great example of a group that fundraises to donate to women's campaigns. We haven't gone that far yet, but it's something we're looking at as well. We know that fundraising is a major barrier for you. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about convincing women to actually run or to go into politics? Are you looking at that, or?
Yes, that's a great point. So then that's the number one thing. Women need to be asked. Thanks for asking me that, because that is the most important thing. Women need to be asked to run for office. Men usually tend to just volunteer and say, oh yeah, I'll do it. Or they're asked once and they say, oh yeah, of course I've thought about it. Sure, I'm in. But women need to be asked 3 times or more. And so that's actually one of the big things that a group like ours does, is we make lists of women who are leaders in the community, or we ask just the community and the leaders in the community to identify women they think might be good for politics, and we just call them up and say, have you thought about it? And there's lots of coffee dates involved. There's a particular coffee shop in Edmonton that I call my second office because of how many coffee dates I have there, sitting with women, asking them to run, and have you thought about it? Have you thought about running? And so it's a one-on-one like that. And then there's also a media strategy to sort of share that on a wider platform and share that with the community to say, hey, have you encountered women who are leaders in your community and who you think should run? Go ask them to run for office. Who's that? Think of their name in your head right now. Okay. Yeah, no, that's my friend Wendy. She's the chair of the daycare board, or she's the finance on the community league. And call Wendy and ask her to run for office. Has she ever thought about running for office? And that's what it takes, and that's what it is.
So what could you say is your biggest win, or could you tell us about one of your big wins?
Yeah, so I would say 2 things. We developed a strategy leading up to the 2017 Edmonton municipal elections that I think contributed to doubling the number of women running for our municipal elections compared to the 4 years before. So we were really proud of that. It wasn't just us, but I think it was a contributing factor. So really proud of that work, and we learned a lot in the process. So now we're gearing up again and excited to try the next thing. And also just the board and the organization of Parity YEG itself. I've sort of always intended for it to also effectively be a mechanism for women to run for office. Like maybe that's a step along their journey. So last year we recruited a new vice chair governance for the board. And I had known her sort of through a friend. She's a lawyer, and I knew that she had run some campaigns before and was interested in politics. And so she joined our board. And then she was asked to run for provincial government, and she ran and she won. So she's a member of our Alberta Legislative Assembly now, an elected politician. And I consider that a huge success. That's her success, but that's a wonderful thing for our organization as well.
So any plans for, doing this on a larger scale or outside of Edmonton or?
Yes, I'd love to. Our Parity Bot project, we'd like to sort of deploy for our federal election coming up in Canada in the fall. I guess it's just a couple months away now. So we'd like to see how that goes. And I've always thought that, I wanted to start in Edmonton because it's a city I know really well and a community I know well, and where I'm recognized as a leader in this area. And also because I really believe in sort of that local grassroots effort. Like I mentioned, calling Wendy, knowing about Wendy on your, Riverbend Community League board. That's how we get more women into politics. That's my theory. And so I'd love to see the Edmonton effort grow really strong and robust, and then see if we can somehow replicate that across the country within sort of even micro communities, within a neighborhood, within a city, within a province, and then can it spread across the country and maybe the world.
Wow, excellent. So, what about you? What about you in politics? Any plans for that?
Yeah, another question I've been asked a lot, and so I had to prepare an answer. And at this point, the only thing I can say is yes. At some point, I would like to run for office as well. I'm sort of thinking about when that might be the right time for me, and I'm almost there, figuring out a strategy. One of the things I'd like to do before I do that is improve my French. Canada is a bilingual country, and I'm a native English speaker, and I've learned French a little bit over the years, but I'm not fluent. So I'd like to improve my French, and then think about where I can make the biggest impact. So we'll see. The details aren't there yet, but yeah, I think at this point, if I didn't try to run for office, even if I lose, it would be a failure. So I gotta try.
Well, you're going to have a chance to brush up your French in Montreal, right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, Lana, is there anything you would like to say before we end? Any advice to women, or any words to conclude, words of wisdom?
Great question. I was thinking about the name of the show, Transformation TV, and it's funny because my current job in Edmonton that I'm just wrapping up at ATB Financial, the department I work in is called Transformation, because this wonderful organization, I've absolutely loved working there. It's just been a wonderful experience. I've learned so much. It's funny that I've sort of ended my time there for now in a place called Transformation, where I would say that everything I've learned at that job has really transformed me as a person and as a professional. And the
in what way has it transformed you?
Yeah. So the key ways and the key skills I think I learned there have to do with communication and conversations and vulnerability. I think I'm trying to, it's looked a few different ways over the time that I've been there, but one of the things I learned to do there was just how to have a difficult conversation, and that has totally changed my life and my relationships, and changed how I show up to challenges and how I do things. And so I would say that's kind of been on my mind lately as something transformational for me over the last few years. And that might be some advice, that deliberately learning how to have a difficult conversation the particular book that I read is by Susan Scott. I think it's called Difficult Conversations, or it's called Fierce Conversations. I can't remember which one, but it was that book and a course sort of around that book that started that journey, and then building it into a practice and a habit in my different relationships at work and in life. So yeah, that's a piece of advice I would leave you with.
So have the difficult conversations instead of just keeping it in and
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Lana, for spending the time with us. And I'm wishing you lots of luck in your move to Montreal. A new
Thank you.
New chapter for you. And I hope you run for office one day.
Thank you, Pascale. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.